while you were at the CSIR when you had India's biggest demolition project land on your table?
It was a very interesting project. It was a pair of twin towers in Noida. These were 240-foot towers, higher than the Qutub Minar. They were right next to the nearest building of Emerald Court. There was no known playbook for such a demolition. How can you be a Nobel Prize winning astrophysicist and a devout Christian? As I said, mathematically we were saving 10,800 lives per day.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another episode of Let's Chat with GB. Today I'm super excited because who we have with us is one amazing personality. It's hard to typecast him: educator, innovator, scientist, investor, and so much more, maybe even a disruptor. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to have with us today Dr. Anjan Ray. Doctor, thank you so much for being here and taking out time to be on Let's Chat with GB today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
And truly, you truly wear so many different hats that I think people will really struggle to put you in one particular bucket, but that's probably who you've been for as far back as you can remember as well.
Yeah, my wife always reminds me of this incident. I was in Belgium. We were newly married and we'd gone to a supermarket. And at that time I was working for a multinational chemicals company in their cosmetic ingredients business. Right. So I'm in the supermarket, I'm picking up something, and somebody next to me says, "Oh, Anjan." And this is somebody who I know from Bombay. Okay. And she and her husband, also newlyweds, are out there. And she's like, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Oh, my office deputed me here for a few weeks." She says, "All India Radio deputes people to Belgium?" So, she only knew me in my role in those days as a broadcaster. Yeah. So my wife was vastly amused, still quotes that occasionally.
Yeah, of course, the radio broadcasting piece and the fact that you're also a passionate musician. So we'll talk about some of those things in due course as well. Growing up, and were you a Delhi boy? I was looking at the fact that you went to DPS, RKP, and so a lot of your time was spent in Delhi growing up?
Yes, I was extremely lucky because although my father was in the armed forces, he was a lot older than me, and he was close to his retirement posting by the time I was school going. Okay. So from about the class 1, I was in Delhi. DPS was later. I was originally living in the cantonment, so I went to Mount St. Mary's for my first to fourth. Right. And then Delhi, and then fortuitously, without any specific intent, I landed in IIT Delhi. And then after that, I was away from Delhi for a long time.
Right. And this entire seed of disruptive thinking and always trying to be innovative, where did that come from? Growing up, where was that seed really planted?
I don't know. I don't know that I was ever really a disruptive thinker in that sense, but I was always curious. Right? I asked a lot of questions, and I'm told that at least some of my teachers tell me, including my PhD guide, who was a Nobel laureate, they tell me that I was a darn nuisance in class because they would ask far too many questions and delay them.
Love that.
Right. So I think disruptive thinking or innovation came more from seeing that my natural impatience didn't really like a status quo that wasn't moving the needle. So maybe that's where that started.
Like that.
Yeah.
And of course, at some point you decided to actually go and give back, and you actually did a stint at XIC in Bombay, which I believe was by accident, but then you stayed on for many, many years. So I'd love to hear about that and what took you down that path.
Okay, so that one is a funny story. It's the second time in my life that I had to do something like that. So one day I got a call from an aunt. In a sense, she's the mother of one of my former classmates. Right. And somebody I would rarely say no to because I've spent many happy evenings at their house with tea and cakes over the years. So she called and she said, "I have a request, but you can't say no." So I'm like, "Please tell me." She says, "No. First you say yes, then I will tell you." And it's one of those. Tricky. So it's tricky ones. Now, in those days, I was working for the same chemical company in New Bombay, before it became Navi Mumbai. And she says, "Okay, so I've taken that as a yes. Xavier Institute of Communications in downtown Bombay near VT needs a journalism teacher stand-in, immediate, to teach something on the general principles of communications, music, art, the sort of historical background of communications, and broadcast journalism, and maybe some more stuff on technical writing. And you only need to do it twice a week, 6:30 to 8:30. So just say yes. And like, oh. And this is, I think it was August or September or something. And I'm like, but the term must have started. Sure. She's like, yes, but the lady decided to up and leave for, I don't know, America or Australia or something. So, so they need somebody, and I could only think of you who can cover all these things at short notice. So I said, okay, how long for? So she said, oh, I don't know, just this term, it's another 5 weeks left. Right. I said, what about syllabus grading? She said, you'll figure it out. You're an enthusiastic young man, I'm sure you'll get it done. I said, okay, reluctantly. Yeah. And yes, as you said, I stayed for 4 years. So.
And obviously you've had like a tremendous impact on the lives of so many, because there are just, so many people I've met and they recall the classes that you used to conduct. Just to be, their favorite and their best. How are you approaching it? Because you're not, a traditional trained educator, and you come into this, place, and you've got children who are maybe 18, 19, 20, 21, around that. How did you approach them, and what was your thought process?
So, I went back to the time when I was, apart from being broadcasting, I also did do some print journalism. I did some reporting for the Sunday Observer. I did features for the Times of India. I actually wrote a cover story for Gentleman magazine and for the Illustrated Weekly. So I'd been writing for many years. I had my own column in the Daily Pennsylvanian when I was at UPenn. So what I thought I would do is, I figured there'll be enough people who will teach them how to write a report, who will teach them how to gather news, the 5 Ws and H. Sure. All of that I assumed it would already be done. Right. So I thought I would just show them how one gathers and processes information from the informal world, from the real world. So I would hold some classes outdoors. I would use a lot of music and videos and movie clips in my sessions. I would get into conversations on philosophy and actually try to generate a bit of debate. Because unless people have an opinion, you can't write well. So I was really trying to push people to not just have, but to express opinions. And then maybe even to temper those opinions based on the audience set. So that's broadly what my style was.
Love it. And again, out of the box, thinking in the 90s. Today might be, slightly more mainstream, but I think at that time, and hence you've had some students who've gone on and done some good things. I think you read a lot about Subina, and she's done some good things as well. So yeah, some of your batchmates, at the batches that you taught have done pretty good.
I'm very proud of them. I've had people who've had now 15-year careers in human rights, people who've been on WSJ, Subina, who's been nominated for various international awards, Annie, who's now an acclaimed author, Santosh Vijay Kumar, who actually teaches media misinformation in Northumbria.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lovely. And let's not forget Mrinalini.
Mrinalini, of course, yes. She was one of the first who took the bait of going into financial journalism. Most people would roll their eyes and say, what is that? But even interestingly, in my class, I had somebody who was senior to me in school, several years senior to me. He was actually head boy in Mount St. Mary's when I was in the 4th. And he went on to become a Lieutenant General, DG of Assam Rifles, negotiator for Manipur. But he was in my journalism class, actually sitting in when I was teaching communications. That was quite a...
Amazing. Yeah, and truly, communication is such an important part. It's so often said, the quality of life is the quality of your communications. So I'm sure that had a really big impact. Let's talk about kids today, and they are spoiled for choice, both in terms of, career choices, educational options. There's a lot of noise and distraction out there as well. So your advice to the youth of today, because we do have a lot of listeners, who are, looking at career paths. So education and careers and youth today, thoughts on that?
All right, I'm going to start with a little correction because in a sense, the kids that you described who are spoiled for choice are kids in the socioeconomic category A1, A2, maybe B1. Sure. The further we go down the pyramid, the fewer the apparent choices. The real choices may be much wider. So what I usually encourage most people to do, and I get a lot of people asking me, particularly from the lower rungs of the privileged categories, a lot of people ask me, what should I be studying? And I usually offer 2 or 3 very simple things. The first is, be really good at English and your home language. If you can, be really good at English, Hindi and your home language. Right. Without language, you go nowhere. Sure. The second is, do what you love. There's always room for talent, and the chance that you're good at what you love is usually high. Yeah. And the third is, keep at least one plan B. Because you never know what happens. So I know, for example, one young man who was a brilliant aircraft mechanic, maintenance guy, and he was flying very high in a private airline, and then the airline went bust, and now for 4 years, he is having to work on his plan B. He's turning into a supply chain expert, right. But it's taken 4 years to go there. So I tell most kids that remember that things might be different when you're mid-career. Yeah. So have a plan B, keep a second skill that will someday come in handy. And it reminds me of a Stephen King book called Eyes of the Dragon, where a commoner girl refuses to marry a prince because he has no skills.
Okay, yeah. And it's interesting, you mentioned about the fact that have something that you love, to be in the mix as well, something that you're passionate about. But often I also hear people saying that your passion's probably not going to go ahead and pay the bills. However, it may actually keep you on path, when things aren't going right. So thoughts on pursuing your passion. I mean, you're very passionate about music, and it's played a big role in your life. So thoughts on passion and...
Well, I can give you examples in both directions. I know of people who prioritized music over everything else and didn't quite make it, and ended up a little bit like the starving artist in a garret, bitter at life and all of that. I also know people who just stuck with their passions, but also had the common sense to hear what other people suggest and at least work around the edges of their problems. Right. So my favorite example is India's first commercially successful poet of my generation. Is a guy called Sudeep Sen. So while he is a sellout poet, is invited to do workshops all over the world, is in South Africa 1 week, in Japan the other, and has 1 foot in England. He is also a good photographer, and he is Apple iPhone's ambassador for photography, right? So, so he has got a semi-commercial alternative. So if tomorrow his book stopped selling or his royalties stopped flowing, and he would have another option.
That is a plan B in place.
That is a plan B in place. Another is sort of a nephew of mine. He was trying to study molecular biology, and he liked the subject. I don't think he was passionate about it. Right. He was a very talented singer, and he was singing with the Delhi choir, the capital city minstrels. Right. And I said, have you ever considered being an opera tenor? And I was in Bombay in those days, and he was like, I would love to be an opera tenor, but how do I get there? I said, well, we're having a little show in Bombay, and there's a room for a couple of songs there from a vocalist. Come over and we'll see how the audience takes it. So he came, he sang at the NCPA, at the little theatre in front of a small crowd of 110 people. And now he's singing opera at the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden. He taught at a high school because his molecular biology teaching stood him in good stead while he was taking lessons in the UK. And now he is going to, I forget whether it's the first half or the second half of Oxbridge, but he's studying to be a pastor. His wife is a Catholic. So now he has decided he will also spend time on the spiritual side of things, because he actually enjoys singing cantatas and things.
Yeah.
You never know where it takes you.
Agreed. Also, I see today that there is, it's almost like this BSO syndrome, like, when you talk about the bright, shiny object syndrome, where someone is going down a path, but then, they're almost, taken off course by something that they may see on, social media, or, potentially like, something that they may have seen through, a mentor. So your advice to people to stick the path, to be patient, because I think there's one thing that's also lacking in a lot of people today is patience and persisting in one particular path before jumping ship and going down some other route. So ideas and thoughts on that?
I think that worked well for me particularly, because I have far too many interests. And there was a time when my dad sat me down and he said, just think about this. What's easier, science as a career and music as a hobby, or the reverse? Do you really want to give up science and do only music? So then I thought really hard about that. And he said, but at the same time, keep your options open, no harm in that. So I used that to get started. And then again, my PhD guide, who was like a second father to me, gave me almost the same advice. He told me that I will not write you a recommendation letter for postdoctoral work in the same field as you've done your PhD. You have to go to your postdoctoral in something else so that your options are wider. So that was a big learning for me. So I stayed with science as a core field, but not with any particular subset of science. I didn't really think I was suited to be a super depth person. So that's the other insight that I learned, that most of us are either depth people or width people. If you figure out which one you are, you're probably better off with that.
Like that, depth person or width person. And you're also someone who's always challenged status quo. You've got out of your comfort zone. Like just, in Navi Mumbai, you're with ICI. Was it ICI at the time? ICI at the time. And then, you get a call and say, okay, go teach, kids broadcast journalism and communication. So you've also challenged status quo. You've also put yourself out of the comfort zone. I think that's an important lesson for people as well.
Yeah, that I think came from my dad. So my father was he was a Second World War veteran. He was a doctor. So he trained as a doctor, then he got shipped off to the war. It was a large family, 11 brothers, sisters, and my grandfather died early before partition. So there was a lot of responsibility on the elder brothers. So at the age of something like, he was 26 when he went to war. So by that time, he was an excellent cook, a crack shot, a practicing medical doctor, could do everything that he needed to do to survive on his own. So by the time I was 8 or 9 years old, I knew forest craft because he would take me along. I would be carrying my little .22 rifle with me. So what I learned at quite early in life, or imbibed, I don't think it was formal learning. Right. What I imbibed was that it is up to you to be comfortable wherever you are. The circumstances don't determine it, you do.
Yeah. Now being, like the scientist, that you are, you hear a lot, and just last week we were recording something, with someone who's quite a spiritual person, and he was talking a lot about, karma and fate and all of that, and the destiny aspect of stuff. So as a scientist, is there some like dissonance in that regard where you're like, not really in, let's say, in line with your views?
Actually, it resonates quite well with my line of thought. Somewhere in the 1980s, Professor McDermott and I went to hear a lecture by William Fowler, who won the Nobel Prize for evidence supporting the Big Bang Theory. And at the end of the lecture, somebody asked him, Professor Fowler, how can you be a Nobel Prize winning astrophysicist and a devout Christian? Now, Fowler was a big man. He kind of looked down from the podium almost pityingly at this guy. He said, sir, everything we consider supernatural or divine or paranormal is just beyond the boundaries of science as we know it. Sure. So then over the years, Professor McDermott and I got talking, and I think it was still a few years before he won the Nobel Prize, my guide. Right. And we got talking about the paranormal world, and he said that as a scientist, you must not disbelieve what you cannot disprove. And I actually spent 7 years wandering graveyards and haunted places, trying to collect evidence of one way or the other. And the jury is still out. I did write a book on it, but really? I don't think I reached a conclusion.
You spent 7 years on that?
I spent about 7 years on part-time, obviously, including, those years included my Xavier's years. So I actually took one of the batches, I don't think it was your batch, to a haunted beach and told them the story around the beach, took them up to one of the abandoned hotels there, which was supposed to be part of the haunting and all of that.
Right. Wow. Yeah, that is something. Let's talk about the innovation space and how there's just been so many patents and innovations that you've been actually a part of as well. And I was reading about one of your pieces where it was also about addressing mercury in batteries. Okay, and I mean, there've been so many more. So I'd love to know about this one, because this has obviously been a big service to the environment, and to mankind as well. But other like this and other innovations that come to your mind as being something quite spectacular.
So in my career, like most scientists do, I would have attempted about 200 products or innovations. When I last took stock, about 30 had succeeded, about 5 were blockbusters, or blockbuster in the sense they satisfied me at least.
Right.
The battery one was actually my first. So it was a 1994 story.
Okay.
And this company came to us. We were manufacturing what are called surfactants, which are ubiquitous molecules, many kinds, that help incompatible things mix, like oil and water, or powder and solvent, right? And they came to us saying that we have this peculiar problem. We have these red cells that are used in torches. They were used everywhere. And we have been told that in less than 2 years, we have to get rid of mercury. And these cells contain mercury. So mercury was used to coat the zinc anode during the cell reaction.
Right.
And if you didn't have mercury working with the zinc anode would eventually leak and crack and the cell would be gone.
Sure.
And plus, ugly stuff would ooze out and sometimes ruin your device as well. So nobody had exactly done anything like this. And there wasn't much time, and we were a commercial outfit, so we were not planning to, go back into the lab and invent something from scratch.
Right.
So me and a few colleagues got together, we brainstormed, and we said, okay, so the issue is not about removing mercury. The issue is about protecting zinc. So in hindsight, it is like the same thing as saying that the issue is not about photography on film, the issue is about preserving memories, right? It's the same. So we said we won't look for an in-kind solution. We'll try to find something not in kind that protects zinc. And using some very basic science principles and a Russian principle called TRIZ, which tells you that there's only 76 solutions to every single possible technical problem in the world.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's by a Russian general called Altshuler, who was sent off to Siberia by Stalin, but because he was very famous, this is long before Navalny happened, obviously. So he was put in charge of a library, and all he did was he studied the patents and the patent office there, and realized there were only 76 patterns. So we applied that, and in 3 months we could find something that complexes, so locks up zinc almost as well as mercury, maybe not as well. We decided to test it. It worked beautifully. So we took it straight into production. We got the problem in April. We sent it out to the factory in October. And then it ran beautifully in October, and November everything froze solid because it was too cold in Calcutta. Then we had to redesign it to meet the cold. But 25 years later, it's still in use.
Amazing. I love how you approach the problem as in a different way. Where they were talking about elimination of mercury, you're saying, no, let's preserve the zinc. And that approach was very, very unique. So that was, of course, one of many, and you said one of 5 of your favorites. Let's hear about some of the other ones which are also up there.
So I think the other one that really, in my mind, I feel very good about, I know my team who really worked on the invention side worked really good about it, was during COVID. India had a bit of an oxygen shortage. And there was a major national thrust to put oxygen plants across hospitals in remote areas in the country. And this was being handled by the Defense Research and Development Organization, who wanted to build 1,200 odd plants. And my organization, the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, came to us. This was on 15th of April 2021. The second wave was upon us. But during the first wave, we had started to think about, if the crisis came, what would we do? So we had started working on the science of how to purify oxygen from air. It's a well-known science. It was not new. But as petroleum scientists, we were very good at keeping oxygen out of things, right? Because oxygen is the first cause of a flame or a disaster. So we knew how to take it out. Now the question was, once I take it out, can I use it? So using just that skill, we had already built kind of a prototype. Dr. Shekhar Mande, he was the Director General in those days, very famous scientist. He came to visit us, and the second wave was already upon us. He said, what are you doing? Put it into a hospital. So without really thinking too much, we had the unit. It was kind of a 10-bed sized unit. You needed something 10x the size. Without really thinking, we said, fine, we'll just send this unit to whoever wants it. And the hospital in Pune immediately raised their hand and said, please put it here. So without even thinking, we shipped it out to Pune. And we immediately started to scale it up. Now remember, everything was locked down. We couldn't go and test anything in a hospital. We didn't think that anybody in the hospital would be able to run what looks like a chemical plant, right? It's a purification plant. We didn't know where to get the raw materials from. Some of the raw materials were imported. And we had no vendors who could fabricate it.
And then?
This was April 15th. Right. On October 15th, so ironically it's April, October, just like the Battery Innovation 94. In 2021, on October 15th, we had 108 plants running in 108 hospitals in the country, each servicing 100 beds, all connected by IoT to our laptop. We could run it from our laptops. These were all on a public dashboard put up by DRDO with support from PM CARES Fund. So if people think that the PM CARES Fund was opaque and they don't know what they did, I can tell you they saved hundreds of lives by things like these. Because it was PM CARES Fund, we could spend the money immediately. We did not have to, we had to go through some regulations. We had I had the Honorable Commerce Minister on the phone if I needed something. The missions in France, Germany, Switzerland were talking to the factories there. The Air Force was flying planes back and forth to get the materials. NHA was building last mile if we needed it. I have never seen a country so responsive. So it can be done.
Amazing. And I'm sure this innovation would have saved tens of thousands of lives.
Yeah. As I said, we were, mathematically, we were saving 10,800 lives per day.
Per day. Wow. Wow.
So it was very satisfying.
And that was just such a crazy time. I think the amount of fear and the emotions running through people at that time was just unprecedented. But thank you for doing what you did and what the team did as well.
That's my team's job. They were every single day they were meeting 7, 8, 10 hours a day. They were actually in direct contact. A couple of them were down with COVID and speaking from their hospital beds. The person who was in charge of the oxygen initiative, Gurucharan Mahapatra, he was at the time, I think, the secretary for road transport. He died from COVID. So I still remember the day he said, I'm not feeling so well, I'll go to the hospital, and never came back out. So,
yeah, we lost some good people at that time, unfortunately.
Yeah, our Director General, his parents died from COVID. So it was
terrible times. I think. Hope that something like that.
So that's why that sticks out in my mind as something where innovation created immediate value.
Agreed. And was it also while you were at the CSIR when you had India's biggest demolition project land on your table? Was that something that happened then as well?
That happened then, and that was again one of those coincidences that I was posted at Dehradun, and about 50 kilometers away, the Central Building Research Institute in Roorkee, their director retired and the new director was not yet in place. Okay. So I was asked to take additional charge for a few months. And during that time, the demolition date came forward. It was a very interesting project. It was a pair of twin towers in Noida, Sector 93A, and the builder there had violated the floor space index and also violated the terms of the green zone development for the previous development he'd done next door, which was called Emerald Court. So the Emerald Court RWA, so the ECORWA as they call themselves, had some very, very persistent, perseverant and socially conscious people, a former chief of police, retired lawyer, an administrator. And these people decided they were not going to bow down. So they first pursued it in the local court, then the Allahabad High Court, which until 2014, with various deferments of dates, was trying to encourage a settlement, I think. But by 2014, it was very clear that violations had taken place, and then they ordered a demolition. But of course, then the case went to Supreme Court. It takes time over there. And in 2021, the Supreme Court upheld the High Court's judgment. But then the question was, how do you demolish it? These were two 40-foot towers, higher than the Qutub Minar. They were right next to the nearest building of Emerald Court, which was 9 meters, 27 feet away. So, there was no known playbook for such a demolition.
Ever in the world?
In the world, I don't know. There was, of course, an unintended one, which was the Twin Towers of New York. But that was a very different kind of thing, right? In this one, the major problem was the proximity of what was there. There was a lot of residential real estate, which was at risk if the demolition did not go as planned. So the only way we could do it is to do it by what's called a vertical waterfall. The demolition contract was given by Noida Authority to an Indian company called Edifice Engineering, who had done a demolition in Kochi of an illegal construction on the, whatever you call it, backwaters front or whatever. So they had some experience, and they had a South African partner called Jet Demolition who were very good at this. So they had come in. The problem was that nobody had any confidence because it had never been done. So the Supreme Court simply said Central Building Research Institute has to supervise and make sure it is done as per the interests of public safety.
And that's how it lands on your table.
That's what lands on my table. So, now, CBRI had a fabulous team, but they had no experience in explosives. They had fabulous experience in structures. Luckily, CSIR had another institute, Central Institute of Mining and Fuels Research in Dhanbad, who were top-notch in explosives. And I had worked on explosives in my early days in my career, so I had some sense. So some 9,000 holes had to be drilled in these two towers. 3,500 kgs of explosives had to be put in without blowing up unintended, right? We had to test whether the explosives really worked by doing a test blast before the actual blast. So we actually looked at all kinds of failure modes. There was, and this was probably not well known to people, there was a fully pressurized gas pipeline under the property, which services the power station at Dadri. So we could not depressurize it beyond the limit, otherwise the power would have gone out for hours.
Right. And for a very large area as well.
For a very, very large area.
Right, right.
So we had to be very, very creative. Working closely with Jet Demolition and the teams from CSIR and Edifice Engineering, we did crazy things like we put containers between the existing building and the building to be demolished, loaded them up with rubber tires, truck tires to cushion the blast if it went the wrong way. Spent hours doing calculations which had to be simulated on a supercomputer to make sure they were precise. When we evacuated the buildings, we actually had all the stray cats and dogs physically removed. We had the birds' nests relocated. We wanted to be as careful as we could. Another CSIR institute in Chandigarh designed the water sprayers that would keep the dust down. It was an enormous public effort. The local police, the local administration. I mean, I don't think we can take credit, but what did happen, for those who saw it, is we had an almost perfect waterfall. We were off by about 1%. So the debris hit the outside boundary wall of one adjacent complex and made a small amount of damage, but otherwise almost as per plan.
This is phenomenal. And of course, I was at ground zero. I happened to live in the complex adjacent where, we had, I think maybe the top floor, maybe bounce off of some of those tires and land, and break the boundary wall. But I think it was phenomenal. And I can only imagine how many, months of preparation would have gone in and how many sleepless nights you would have had prior, because just the responsibility, because I see that area and how built it is, and also what's happening at Emerald Court and at ATS on the other side. But hats off and well done.
Yeah, I think those compliments are really due to the team. I can only say that I happened to be technically in charge at the right time because of all these coincidences.
And what would have been the worst case scenario had something gone wrong? What could have potentially happened on that day as well?
So there were 2-3 potential things that could have gone wrong. One is that it would have actually tilted towards and damaged the adjacent buildings. There was actually a probability of that, so we strengthened the foundations of Emerald Court, or rather we didn't, but the errant builder was made to pay to do that. Some 57 pillars, in our opinion, from structural assessment were substandard, so they had to re-strengthen it. That was one risk. The second risk was that the debris would not fall as planned, and then debris clearance, if it fell into other compounds, would be a nightmare. Then there was the dust cloud, that if there wasn't enough dispersing wind, our dispersion patterns would be inaccurate, and the dust cloud could hang over the place for a long time, maybe cause respiratory diseases. Also, a lot of people had to move out during the demolition. So another objective was get them back in there as fast as possible. So there were a very large number of scenarios. And like I said, I think we got a lot of cooperation at the end of the day from the Noida authorities, from the adjacent societies, from the law and order. They were absolutely fabulous.
Yeah, I think it was a great job because we stayed out for a day extra, but I think the disbursement of the cloud was quick, even though I think bulk of the debris landed, at least the granules, the particles came into our complex, but cleaned up very, very quickly as well. How about that pipeline? Was that a potential nightmare?
It was a potential risk, but we really, really overprotected the risk best as we could. We piled it high with tires. We designed the blast to go away from the pipeline as far as possible. And all of that. So it was literally like trying to play basketball with your hands tied.
Yeah. Cannot even imagine that, but yes, wow. But yes, all's well that ends well, and I think it all went off really, really well, and I think it'll probably be a case study, for years, if not generations to come.
Yeah, I think it's also a message, right? I mean, the technical case study is one thing, but the message that justice prevails was really important.
Yeah, agree. Let's talk about, another hat that you're now donning, where you're now in the space of, venture capital and private equity, relatively, newer foray for you. But what is it that you're now, looking at in that domain? Because this is an area where, and knowing some people in the community, they would go a lot with, gut feel or, what was really happening with, a trend globally and what they might think would happen here, EdTech, for example. But what is your role and, what are you coming in and doing in this domain now?
So, it's a young fund. It's the first SEBI-approved AIF Category 2 fund of this fund house. It's called Navam Capital. But Navam Capital has been an angel and proprietary investor for 15 years. In fact, how I got to know them was I was an angel investor in one of their very first assets back in 2009 when nobody was talking of this space, right? I've always felt that when you have a good business idea, there's only 3 ways to raise money in India for the idea. Okay. The first is grants. Sure. So the government has an ecosystem where you will give grants to an idea, but typically it's easier for you to get that if you're in an academic institution or at least in an incubator. Right. As a freelance inventor, it's almost impossible. Right. The second is debt. But most banks look at an idea and say, why should I fund this? I can fund agriculture where I will have some kind of back-end support, security, right? Or I want collateral. So idea people don't have collateral. It's like George Stephenson had to cut down his furniture to fund his first engine, right? So where we are looking is really the next horizon. We call it deep tech, but that's also a much abused word already. So what we are thinking of is companies that already have some clear intellectual property in something that we foresee will be disruptive, and that's coming from my experience of disruptions. And in the fund, we have people who've worked in disruptions. So the chairman of the fund is Dr. Raghunath Mashelkar, who was the former DG of CSIR and has been championing innovation for 40 plus years. We have Alan Rosling, who was he was on the board of Tata Sons, and he's seen the global space for years. Rajiv Mantri, the founder, who I mentioned, has been an angel investor. He's a material scientist who worked at Lux Capital for some years before he got bit by this bug. So we are looking very critically at proposals that come our way. Not automatic because there is a big market or because there's hype around, let's say, drones or around some kind of biotech, but really drilling down to who will care about the product, what's the traction that they're likely to get, what's their ability to deliver the traction, is the intellectual property coming into conflict with global patents filed by others. So if it's India only, then it might not be so attractive, right? So we don't only look at a model that looks at exiting for valuation, look at a model that creates long-term value over a 10-year horizon.
Very compelling. Can, I mean, I know you mentioned it's a category 2 AIF, but can investors play a role in being a part of it?
Yeah, we are still in a fundraise. So with a minimum ticket size of 1 crore, any investor interested can take a look into the fund. We'd be happy to have those conversations. And we also encourage our investors to make themselves knowledgeable about the kind of things we invest in, because we are not investing in a bubble, right? We are looking to invest in something that is sustainable, not just from the sustainability label as people talk about, but from doing long-term business that improves India's competitiveness while creating lasting value socially and economically.
Amazing. And I think, just on the basis of what I hear and the background of the people involved, I think it really warrants, a look in. So again, for anyone who's looking to make that investment, we'll put the coordinates of, Dr. Anjan Ray and the fund. So, feel free to take that conversation forward as well. You mentioned a bubble, and, I also spend a lot of time with a lot of youth and, across the board really, where there's a lot of attraction towards, let's say, the financial markets, for one. And there's this, the jury's still out. Are we now, in a bubble? Are we heading towards a bubble? Price to earning ratios seem really, really high, where companies like Reliance are now touching 30. You have some of the PSUs that have gone to 100, close to 200 in some cases as well. Your thoughts, on this phenomena?
Yeah, so I'm not a financial markets expert, but my general worldview can be driven by a simple parameter set called the Gini coefficient. So the Gini coefficient is a measure of inequality in any society or group of individuals, measured on any parameter. So at the moment, also to put it in mathematical perspective, if everybody has equal resource, the Gini coefficient is 0. If 1% has all the resource and everybody has 0, the Gini coefficient is 1. Now, if I look at the world's income distribution, a Gini coefficient of around 0.35 is the boundary line between countries that colonized other countries and between countries that were colonized. So people who had the resources taken away have high Gini and high income disparity. People who took the resources have low Gini and low income disparity. So India is almost on the cusp. We are at about a 0.36 Gini coefficient now for our income. But our wealth Gini is 0.82.
So some work to be done there for sure.
Right. No, but what I'm saying is that a simple yardstick that I would apply to the question that you asked about what do I think of financial markets, etc., is financial markets, valuations, stock prices create wealth. They don't create income. Right? Unless you do something that creates income that trickles down to the bottom of the pyramid, and which does it in the long term without subsidies or without doles, you don't create genuine traction towards raising the income Gini and lowering the wealth Gini.
Interesting. I have never heard that before. So again, thank you for educating me in that area. And I've been in the markets for a very, very long time. But yes, learned something new today. The other area I want to talk about, again, something that you're very passionate about is sustainability and the environment. And you've mentioned in some of your conversations where you said India, always was fairly sustainable when we go back, many, many years. So where did it all change and where are we now, headed? So on the sustainability piece, a little bit of background, in terms of how it was in India once upon a time. Where did we kind of lose it? And, where is the world in general heading now when it comes to sustainability?
Right. I think where we probably lost it, or I wouldn't say we lost it completely. There's many parts of India, especially rural India, that's still quite sustainable. I think of people like Suresh Gorana or Chetan Singh Solanki. They're not people who you'll hear of in big bold letters, right? But these are people who live sustainable lifestyles. Chetan Solanki is a professor from IIT Bombay. Last 12 years, he has lived in a converted van, which is fully solar powered. He doesn't iron his clothes because that takes electricity. He's now building a little kind of a educational ashram. So if you look at his Energy Swaraj Foundation website, and you just go take the energy literacy course, it's a 20-minute free course, 12 lectures, it changes your perspective on life, right? So sustainability is fundamentally about two rules. And these rules were encapsulated by one of the greatest thinkers of the second half of the 20th century, who nobody knows about in a way. He is not a politician, not a sportsman, not a lecturer. He's the librarian in Alexandria in Egypt. He's an emeritus librarian now. His name is Ismail Serageldin. And he summarized all the knowledge in his library into 2 rules. The first is the input rule, which I further paraphrase to, thou shalt not take more from the earth than she can give you. And the second is the output rule, thou shalt not dump more on the earth than she can absorb. Quick test during COVID, everything, beaches, forests, mountains, suddenly became more pristine than before.
So true.
Because human beings are the only species that generate waste that other species cannot use at the pace at which we generate.
Right.
You leave a forest alone, all these species are generating waste, but where does it go? It gets used. Right? So I think we lost that when we fell into 2 Western traps. The first is building factories to economies of scale. When you do economies of scale, you build very large supply chains. And those supply chain disruptions, coupled with consumerism, go out and buy, throw what you've got and get a new fashion item every year, use disposable cutlery, use your phone for 3 years and then upgrade. The drive towards overconsumption is what caused a problem. But again, this has been primarily in the top 10, 15, 20% of the Indian population, right? So if we are able to pay attention to our overconsumption and to the way we generate our waste and to creating more hyper-local industry and commerce systems, I think we can still have a shot at reversing what we have.
Yeah, and I think it's a subject that you're very passionate about. And you even mentioned that you're working on a board game on sustainability, if I remember.
Still keep trying to imagine it, but now there are already a couple in the market. There's a climate change game that just came out.
Okay, I'm sure there's always space for more, and yeah, you'll create something interesting there. Do global weather patterns and the changes that are happening there, does it bother you?
Oh, big time. See, it's 2 sides of the same coin, right? Because our lifestyles and the amount of carbon we consume drives one aspect of climate change, and the waste we generate and dump is the other part. What happens when climate change is occurring in our lifetime is that it's hitting the most vulnerable. So it's actually going to widen the wealth Gini. Therefore, it bothers me. So for example, my former team, I'm still involved in this. We are building a little project in Kashipur in Uttarakhand, in the plains, with an engineering college, where we have taken about 5 acres of land. We grow a particular crop. That crop is then crushed into making an oil. The crop residue is used for fodder or for mulching. The oil that you produce is turned right there into biodiesel. You just add everything, go for lunch, come back, the diesel is made. It's completely low-tech. It is done by the farmer or local people themselves on a very small scale of 150 liters a day, 50 liters a batch. Okay. That oil is directly put into the local water pumps or into the tractor and used in the fields itself. That's a diesel now. Now, think of what it does. The farmer, every time he has to go fill diesel, is going 20 kilometers out, 20 kilometers in, spending 8 liters of 40 liters of his diesel tank just coming and going. Now that 8 liters is eliminated. Amazing. Plus, the entire supply chain is his cost of diesel is down, the carbon footprint is down, and some employment is generated. So I'm pleased to say that the next unit is coming up in the new Parliament House. They will use the waste cooking oil from the kitchen of the Parliament House to showcase this unit, hopefully by early next year.
Wow, so leading from the top and yes, making its way down. Wow, lovely.
So imagine if 50,000 of these units, which is only 10% of India's villages, and can go collect oil from the dhabas, grow some crops, take tree-borne oils in tribal forests, 50,000 units is equivalent to the refinery output of Digboy in Assam. And Chhattisgarh has a biofuel development authority. They have already put up one of these units as well.
And what would you recommend? What could listeners of this podcast, watching the video, as in their daily lives, what are some of the things that they could do, sustainable practices that could also help? What are some of the small things that come to your mind?
So I will pick 5. Okay. One is, if you're in a city, make sure that the burner that you're using for your cooking gas is a piped gas burner, not an old LPG burner repurposed for piped gas. Because when you do that, you lose 22% of your gas, and that's methane. It is 25% worse than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. First is just change your burner. Change the whole stove if needs be, but make sure it's a certified PNG burner.
Interesting.
Don't use an old LPG burner, retrofitted with a new nozzle. Don't believe what the gas companies tell you, because they want to sell you 22% more gas that you will waste.
Amazing.
Yeah, first.
Right.
The second, anytime you're going downstairs in a building, no matter how tall the building, take the stairs. Because it takes the same amount of energy to take the lift up as it does to take it down.
That's simple.
Yeah. Third, as far as possible, coming back to traditional habits, don't bathe using a shower, bathe using a bucket and a mug, because it costs energy to pump up water, and anyway water is scarce. So a bucket and a mug, maximum amount of water required for a bath is about 15 liters. In a shower, it's about 40. Right? So that's the third. The fourth is at least pick one day in the week when you don't iron your clothes. Yeah? Wear unironed clothes. If you can, just the clothes that you're not going to be wearing outside, just sort of lay them out and put them under your mattress. They'll be ironed anyway.
All right.
Adequately. Yeah, that's what we used to do in college, right? We had no money for paying for the press wala.
Yeah.
And the fifth one, very easy if you're in the cities, take the metro. Yeah. For the last mile, remember that electric cars are not necessarily less polluting on climate change, but they're better for air quality.
Right.
So if you can get a last mile e-rickshaw or e-car, well and good. But if not, at least you've reduced the metro duration.
I think 5 invaluable points, and I think I'm sure listeners, will smile when they, hear some of those. But if we can do even 3, I guess, we are making a bit of a difference. You spoke about the electric, piece, and of course, yes, a lot of our, EVs are slightly becoming a little more mainstream right now. And I think there was a time where you had even mentioned somewhere that you had a Zen which you retrofitted with an electric engine.
I love that. Yes.
Still?
It's still there in my old institute in Indian Institute of Petroleum. And now that more and more cars are coming up for scrapping, I actually think that this is a business opportunity. That you take an old car, you take out the engine, you take out the radiator, you rebalance it. So it needs a type approval which can be done through 2 or 3 agencies in India. You rebalance the car for the same center of gravity, put in an induction motor, put in a battery, up to 60 kilometers, at least for city driving.
Right.
It'll run for a couple of 100 km worth of single charge.
Right.
And the nice thing is, you don't need special charging. You can plug it into a home wall socket. So if you have a home wall socket in your garage, you just plug it in over there.
Yeah, and this is, I think, I know someone I'm going to connect you with, because I have a friend who's in the space of, EVs, and I think he's the kind of guy who'll just jump into, any idea. So I think this is a great thought.
So, my latest update on that initiative, I just got it a few days ago, is that the first place it's going to be done is in Manipur, which needs a bit of a healing touch. And for 3-wheelers, they are converting it from diesel to EVs in Manipur, this team. So
yeah, because I think when you have a place that is that remote, I mean, even scrapping is probably a nightmare.
Not only scrapping, imagine that all the oil that comes to Manipur is coming from Assam, almost 1,000 kilometers by tanker. And it takes 250 liters of diesel to bring 12,000 liters of diesel or petrol to Manipur. So each liter of diesel gives you 3 kgs of CO2. Every 1,000 liters gives you 3 tons of CO2. So you're decarbonizing, you're reducing cost, you're simplifying supply chains, you're taking tankers off the road. So many benefits, plus local employment.
Agreed, completely. Another quick thought on this one, and I know we're coming to the point we're going to be wrapping up shortly, but EVs versus hybrid. And I see a big move now towards hybrid. In fact, just yesterday I was reading that even some of the biggest luxury car makers, Lamborghini, etc., are now thinking hybrid over EV. Your thoughts on what the future holds, and which does seem to be a better, more sustainable medium as well.
So, in a short sense, it depends. Again, I have personally worked on hybrid charging stations. The major problem today is if you build a charging station, the first thing people do is put a battery. They'll put solar, then they'll put a battery. Right. I don't believe you need a battery. So we have built a 15 kilowatt station at Dehradun, which is solar during the day, wind at night, and biogas whenever neither is available, with a little smart controller running all these. So it's a 24/7 EV charging station. 15 kilowatts is good enough for an EV charging station, right? So as long as you can build an off-grid, fully renewable 24/7 charging facility, EVs are good. Until then, hybrids are great. I drive a hybrid, by the way. I drive a Maruti hybrid. Yeah.
And Toyota is taking it to the next level where they, I think, seem to be making a lot of investment in hydrogen as a fuel source. Is that something that will come to, commercial use in the next decade or so?
I think it will. In fact, Japan already has fuel cell hybrid EVs moving faster than battery EVs. So Japan is leading. But we have to remember that Japan is an island and they have got a much better per capita water availability, clean water availability than India. Today, the model for hydrogen production is electrolyzer based, and you need 99.9% pure water. So for a place like India, where drinking water itself is a bit of a challenge, I think that we need a different paradigm. We have to be able to make hydrogen from sewage water or seawater before we can really say that we have a true solution.
Yeah, so maybe still some time away for us.
I hope not that far away, but I wish more people would work on that than just on electrolyzers, which are, after all, the same game, economies of scale, sort of West-driven thinking. We need a new India-driven thinking.
And again, someone who's done so much, in their lifetime, your advice to listeners of this, podcast, what would your advice to be to them, when it comes to, just making those choices and just achieving, a Zen state of happiness? What would your advice be to people?
Now, advice is a big word. I can suggest to most people that before you take any buying decision, anything that you purchase, if you want to be sustainable, the simplest things to do are don't purchase, defer your purchase. So can I use my old phone or my old shirt for a few more months? Sure. If I buy something, can I recycle something old that I'm going to then render unusable? Right? So reduce, reuse, recycle, repurpose. That is my advice. Just think consciously about your consumption footprint. I think if you do that, the world will be a better place.
Love that. And my last question to you, what is going to be Dr. Anjan Ray's legacy? So what is it that you feel you'll be most remembered for?
I don't know that we need to do that. There is a poem by Shelley called Ozymandias, where somebody builds this huge statue in the desert. And then after a while, nothing remains except the words, "Look upon my work, see mighty and despair." So I think each of us are a very small part of the cosmic puzzle. We don't need to leave a legacy. If we just do our little bit, it's good enough.
And on that note, I think we'll actually end this podcast today. Learned so much across so many different dimensions and domains. And I know we only scratched the surface because there is just so much more that you have to share. And maybe in due course we'll do a second part as well. But I really enjoyed it. That was almost an hour of content that ran really, really so quick. So thank you so much for making the trip. Thank you for taking the time out of your schedule. And I'm sure everyone who's listening in really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you, Gaurav.
It's a pleasure. Yeah. Thank you.